JJJinks!
Truck stop!
It's time for me to review the knives that I got in the last Smoky Mountain Knife Works care package, which I put together myself. And with the supply chain being the way that it is, I don't really anticipate that they're going to bring this back anytime soon, unfortunately. There hasn't been any word on it either way. So I guess we'll just have to hope for the best. Maybe I'll do this again sometime. So here's most of the stuff that I got. I have no idea where the slap bracelet thing went, which is fine because I never really used it. Which is also fine because, you know, to be honest, in these Smoky Mountain Knife Works packages, there's always stuff that I just don't use, but it's cool to get and open and have. But all the stuff on the table right before your eyes I did use. And I wanted to start out by talking about these hot pack things. So this is the one that I shook up and activated before, and I held onto it because I kind of wanted to cut it open and see what's inside of it. And then I kept this one kind of in the packaging. I mean, it's open, because I wanted to see if it lasted, because, like, you know, if you only wanted to use one of them, could you just leave it like this, and then, like, would it still be good, or did it slowly lose its capacity over time because of a little bit of exposure to air? I don't know, it's going to be kind of an experiment. Now, one thing I noticed right away is that this one seems more full than this one, so it's expanded. Now, I don't really know what's going on in here chemically, but I suspect that the pack kind of uptook moisture, and that's what led to the expansion. And it feels a little bit heavier too, so that would make sense. Let's cut this thing open. I will use the Hogue Deca. Still haven't figured that out. They recently put out a version of this knife in Magna Cut, and it's been selling like hotcakes. But I'm fine with my CPM 20CV version. The packaging is very fibrous. I'm gonna pour it into this takeaway container lid. Okay. Interesting. It kind of looks like coffee. Huh. Yeah, it's like earthy. Was there an ingredients list on this? I think there was. Contains iron, water, vermiculite, charcoal, polymer, and salt. Yeah, so the vermiculite is the shiny bits, and there are some chunks which do crumble apart. Well, there we go. That's what the stuff looks like. Set that aside. And, well, let's see if this one warms up. I think it will, just because it, Oh, that's interesting. I'm an idiot. I just realized there is a seal between the two. So, it is individually packaged after all this time. Okay, well, here's what I'm going to do then. I'm going to take it out of the package and just leave it aside and not shake it up to see if it begins heating on its own. So, oh well. Here we go. Okay, I'm actually not going to spend a whole lot of time talking about this knife. It was great. It's everything that I wanted. I loved it. My only complaint is that the pocket clip, for whatever reason, comes loose, and I have to go in and straighten the screws once in a while. And then I discovered something kind of weird about the screws. So I would get my bit, which I believe it was a T8, and I would just kind of go in there and, tighten the screw. But when you look at it from the top down, do you see how that top screw is like obscured a little bit? So I could only really go in at a slight angle, and that made it a bit awkward. I mean, it's still kind of screwed in, but I was worried about stripping it because I'm not able to really get in there, Is that on purpose? Like, that just seems like such a strange design. Yeah, so the fact that the screws loosened up and then the clip would like kind of swing from side to side a little bit, that got annoying. It happened about, once after every like 2 or 3 days of carry. I could always Loctite these things, but then I'd never be able to move it to the other side if I ever wanted to do that without dealing with Loctite. So, a little bit of a flaw. I maybe it's the way I'm carrying it or something. I don't know. I mean, how many different ways can you carry it? So, anyway, yeah, great knife. Good purchase, in my opinion. That's all I'm going to say about that one. There are thousands of videos reviewing this knife, so there you go. Now I want to talk about this thing. The Schrade multi-tool camping survival thing. Gosh, I really wanted to like this thing. It's just right up my alley. It ticks all the boxes of fun. It's a novelty thing. It's bright green. It's fidgety and fun like that. But it's one of those multi-tool things where every single individual function is terrible. It sucks at everything, and where do I begin? Okay, well, the first thing, which I discovered pretty early on after opening it, this knife is unusable because there's no handle, and it's really difficult to cut anything with it. And I tried. I assumed there was a way to attach it somewhere on here where you can like use this as the handle, but that's just not the case. There's just no way to do it. Yeah, similar situation with the striker. It's got this tiny little nub of plastic to hold it with, and even though it's all rounded off, it's still not comfortable because when you really bear down on the thing to try to get sparks out, it does eventually dig into your hand. And then I was thinking, like, well, what if I reattach it, like this? Well, that would actually be useful, and it looks like it does go on there, but then, of course, it eventually flings off, and you can't really bear down on it enough to get it to, throw a spark. So that's a fail. The whistle is... Oh, sorry. The whistle is awful. Listen. A teapot is louder than that. I don't know how they fucked up a whistle. That's terrible. Now let's talk about the drivers and stuff underneath. I actually, for once, did actually try to use these hex drivers because I was taking apart something at work that had big bolts like that. But the problem is, so like, let's say your bolt is here, and then you're like, okay, well now I can't see because this thing is big, and yeah, that caused a lot of problems. I couldn't quite figure out how to align it properly because I can't see what I'm doing. Same thing with the bottle opener, the cap lifter. It works, but you're sort of going in blind. So those kinds of things should be a lot easier than that to use. Now the pocket clip is also awful because while it is deep ride, it's so wide that it's cumbersome to get into the pocket, and it's resting on this tab there, so there's nothing really holding it into place all along the clip. All the tension is in this one spot, and doesn't have a huge amount of tension, and the surfaces are slippery, so I found the thing riding up out of my pocket constantly. I almost lost this thing like 3 times. So eventually I gave up and I said, well, there's nothing really useful on here anyway. Why am I bothering? Well, I bothered because I wanted to like it. And I can't. Even the Fire Striker. Look, check this out, alright? They give you a coated blade to use a ferro rod. That doesn't quite work. It needs to be bare metal against the rod. So I took a file and I filed off some of the coating on the back of the blade here. And even then, you gotta really work to get a spark. Whoa! And I had to remove this coating using another, I think I used the file, because this thing was just useless at it. You know, you could sit there all day. Anyway, nothing redeeming about this at all, except I like the color. Which is too bad, because it could have been a great fun thing. But instead, it was just frustrating. Sorry, Shrade, you dropped the ball on this one. My expectations weren't really high to begin with, so it wasn't that much of a disappointment in the end. So now we come to these 3 knives, which I want to spend the most amount of time talking about, because they were the most surprising and in ways I didn't expect. First of all, let's talk about the CEO Compact. There are a lot of review videos about this knife already on the internet. This one spent the most amount of time in my pocket because, again, I really wanted to like it. Here were my expectations. I would love this knife. I would like this knife. And I would think this knife was just okay because it's a Smith & Wesson knife. What ended up happening was I ended up not really liking this knife very much. And I ended up loving this knife. And I thought this one was pretty good. So the results were different from my expectations, which happens a lot, which is a good thing in general. But here's why. First of all, I am a fan of CEOs in general, the OG, bigger knife. I talked a lot about how this knife solves certain problems, leaves others in, and let's just jump right into it. Elephant in the room time. How long do you think I carried this knife for? A year? 2 years? No. But by the looks of it, yes. Yeah, this was one of the things going in. I knew ahead of time the finish on the scales was just awful. People complained a lot about this. That it rubs off, it chips off, and it looks like this after, well, about 3 weeks this spent in my pocket, business days wise, and this is what it looks like now. They called this finish some kind of a blue color. I said it looks more like a gray color, but now it just looks like it's been through Vietnam. You might also notice that there is no pocket clip. I had to remove it because it's terrible. I did not have a good experience with this pocket clip, and I'd rather not have it on there at all. And here's why. Notice how far it stands off from the knife, way up here, and then it slowly comes back in at a shallow angle down to here. That means there was not a whole lot of tension on the fabric when it was in your pocket, and it rode up constantly. This was another knife that I almost lost it a couple of times when I'd reach down to feel for it once in a while, and it was almost up and out of my pocket, and that really annoyed me. Otherwise it was okay. It went in fine. It came out too well. So I decided pocket clip has got to go, and it's just gonna live in my pocket on the bottom with my keys. Well, I gotta tell you, before I started carrying it that way, it was still getting banged up like this. Now, I'm okay with a just distressed look. Call it patina, call it battle damage, or whatever you want to say. But this is pretty ugly looking, and I am disappointed in CRKT for a couple of reasons. Number one, who thought this was going to be okay with the user base? Even with people who are okay with the damaged, used, distressed look, that's not everyone. That's a minority of people, I would say, unless it's a knife that you've carried with you for years and years and years and it shows. But this was just a few weeks. Come on, man. The other annoyance, which I expected, was closing it. It still has that issue of a very hard to access liner lock, and I actually was tempted to go in with a file and make my own little groove here, but I didn't, because I didn't want to spend that kind of time on it. If this was a knife that, you know, I wanted to carry for EDC for a long time, I would have to do that. But I found another way of closing it, which is pretty simple. Using my forefinger, I move the liner here, and then I just give it a little flick, like that, and then you can close it one-handed. I figured that out pretty early on because I was just so tired of this inaccessible liner causing problems. And the blade is so light that you can let it kind of bang onto your finger like that, and it doesn't do any damage because it just weighs so little. Speaking of the blade, I was not familiar with this kind of steel. It was a weird series of like numbers, and I've heard it described on other channels as like G. I've heard it described on other channels as like a 440-ish kind of steel. And it was good. It kept its edge. It cuts really well. It's fun to use once you have it out of your pocket and it's open and you're cutting. And that can be argued as like, well, isn't that the most important bit? Well, the answer is yes. But for $40-something, I expected a lot more out of this knife. There's one more thing I must talk about, and that is the pommel piece, the bottom thing. First of all, after I removed the pocket clip, I noticed there's kind of this weird little divot right there next to the screw hole. I don't know what that is or why it's there. It's just kind of a weird thing. I didn't expect it to be there. These corners, even though everything's chamfered, these corners are still sharp, and they dig into your palm, and it really gets annoying. And you do have to let it dig into your palm because this thing is so small and it has a strong detent. So when you go to flip it open, you gotta kind of grip it hard to get it to go, and that causes the digging. That got so annoying that I actually rounded out one of the corners. I just grabbed, old metal file, went to town on it, then, went at it with a little polishing paper to smooth it out. And that corner, I mean, it's not the best filing job in the world, but I rounded out that corner and a bit of the edge, and now it's comfortable. That corner is no longer pokey. Ow, ow, ow. Oh, one more thing to say about the liner lock is that when I discovered I can just close it like this, I was really, really happy that I finally figured out, get rid of that corner and close it like this, and we're good. Then I cut my nails, and I couldn't do it anymore for like 4 or 5 days. It would just keep slipping because there ain't no nail there. So for those days, I carried a different knife, and I was like, God damn it. This knife just has so many barriers to overcome. But I tried to overcome as many of them as I could because, like I said, I wanted to love this knife. So, yeah, for $40-something, it's a bit much. I would pay maybe $15 or $20 for it, especially since it comes with a low-end steel and all these design flaws. Like I said, they fixed some. The flipper tab's a nice addition, but overall, it's a bit of a ball drop. And I get it. It's a design that you don't want to stray too far away from because it's based on the CEO, so they kind of have to keep a lot of that. But it's just too much money for what you get. You can stand it up on its base, so there's that. The CEO Compact. I guess we'll talk about the Wasp mini sodbuster, or whatever they call this thing. So I ended up using this, I would say, about 7 or 8 days, maybe more. And here is why I really loved this knife. I'm a bit flebby. First of all, the pattern is excellent. It's just like it showed in the pictures, and I knew I would like it. I've already talked a lot about that in the previous video. Second of all, the liner lock is actually really well done. I was a little bit concerned because of how far it protrudes that it was going to be a hot spot, but it's actually been smoothed over enough that you can feel it, but it's really not that more obtrusive than, say, a pocket clip would be, just in a different spot, and it did not detract from its use at all. I cut lots of things with it. The way that they do this little swedge at the tip actually allowed me to use this to jam it into some things and pry, which I know you should never do with a knife, but I was in a desperate situation where I had to get a bad push-button fuse out of a back panel of a piece of equipment, and it was the only tool I had at the time, so I just pop, and it came out. And it only was able to get in there because they narrowed the swedge right there. Pretty cool. And the walk and talk is fantastic, even after clipping my nails. Enough of the knife protrudes out of the handle that I could easily grip it, no nails needed. I will say about the lockup though, if you do kind of a soft, if you do like a soft opening, the liner doesn't move over so much. It was a lot worse earlier. I think it's breaking in a little, but yeah, I'm not confident that would pass a spine test. And then, you know, if I were to do something like that, it would probably damage that liner lock to the point where now it would be unreliable. So you really do have to give it some oomph when you're opening it, and then it locks up just fine. So just be aware of that. And the centering on it is pretty good, which I normally don't care too much about centering when it comes to these classic folders, but they did a good job with this. It's nice and tight. There is no blade play, and you know, compared to the case Sodbuster knife I had some months ago, this is leaps and bounds above and beyond in quality. The spine is very highly polished, no gaps whatsoever. This is better than case quality nowadays. I know the case quality control, anecdotally, but I mean, there have been some Reddit posts from people who work in that company, and they say, yes, our quality control department has gone to shit. That's real. But the folks at Rough Rider have done an excellent job with this knife, and probably the others in the series, I would assume. They make this wasp style scale material for, I know they have like a trapper. I can't remember all the rest, but I would buy more of them because they're only like $17 a piece, and the steel is a steal because it's VG10, which is kind of a mid to low range, but far better than what's on this one. And this one was like 2.5 times more money. And that leads us to the Smith & Wesson Executive Barlow. This knife was a very pleasant surprise. I will begin by talking about the blade itself. It's a sheep's foot blade, which has, I think it might have a hollow-ish grind to it. I never had to sharpen it, but that's nice for making it a good slicer. I did a lot of food prep with this knife. I cut potatoes, the little potatoes. I've cut chicken, raw chicken, as well as chicken tenders. Gotta have my tendies, as well as various other random work tasks, cutting boxes, opening boxes. The centering never really moved. There's no blade play. This is a well put together knife, and for Smith & Wesson, it's like I said, a very pleasant surprise. I was a little bit put off, just a little bit, by the chevron-shaped bolsters, because that's just not normally what I recognize in a Barlow. It's usually just a straight-across piece. But it did grow on me after a while, even though, it's just a looks thing. The G10 knurled scales, they're fine. It's knurled G10. I mean, if you know what that feels like, then you know. One thing I appreciate about it is how it's chamfered very generously all the way around. This knife has no hot spots. It also has no jimping, which is fine. I don't think any of these knives, except for the Hogue, had jimping, and I didn't miss it. I always thought it was kind of a necessary thing. You wanted something up here to prevent your thumb from slipping or your finger from slipping, but the grip of the scales is great enough. But the grip of the scales is sufficient that you don't really need it. So another thing is, I was also a bit concerned about the spine of the blade. It looks sharp. It is a almost 90-degree change in angle from the spine to the blade, and it is a little sharp, but they chamfered it just ever so slightly, and when I do like slide my thumb or finger along it, it feels fine. There's no cutting sensation or anything like that. No problem there. And of course, with the assisted opening mechanism, the deployment is great. The lockup stayed true the whole time, and the little cutout that they left for the liner lock, I was concerned maybe that's not enough of a cutout. It's very subtle, but between it and the space between the liner and the liner lock, you can get the fleshy part of your thumb in there, and it's never been a problem. Nothing like the CEO Compact. This knife is actually really well designed. You cannot move the pocket clip anywhere, so if you're not a fan of tip-down only carry, maybe you'd have to tap a couple of holes into the G10 for yourself, which I'm kind of surprised they didn't do. It seems like such a small thing, but in order to keep it budget-friendly, I guess the fewer machining operations, the better, you know? So, that is the Executive Barlow. I think these three knives were a fine selection for this box. Great variety, and you know, you have like the higher-ish end, and I say that just because of the price. Small flipper, the classic Rough Rider. I was about to say slip joint. Classic sort of knife, and something cheap but surprisingly good. And of course, you had the Deca. And then something cheap and novelty that was a sore disappointment. But that's par for the course, shall we say. Now, returning to the hand warmer. Oh yeah, it's warm. So, it turns out it's just exposure to the air that causes it to heat up. You don't need to shake it. Shaking it probably just makes it go faster. So, yeah. Now we know. So if that package were punctured, I'm sure this probably would have lost its heating ability. Because, yeah, it just has to sit there. And as I arrange everything for the thumbnail, I am reminiscing about the great month that I had and how much I missed having a variety of things to carry and use and play with, and it's fun. It's one of the more fun parts about this hobby, in my opinion. I guess I'll just keep doing it myself if SMKW doesn't. They gave us a great template to work off of. I just, you know, maybe not every month, maybe every 2 or 3 months, but yeah, I liked this so much, I think I am going to continue. That was the JJJinks package number 1. I'll see you next time.